Alright, assalamu alaikum everybody. How are you all? I hope that you all are doing well. Welcome or welcome back to the class. In today's class, we will be solving the topical MCQs of the biological molecules. Specifically, we are going to look at the topical MCQs of the lipid portion in the biological molecules. So we are going to start off with question number 1 over here. Question number 1 over here is from October-November 2020, paper 1-3, question 11. The question says that which row shows a correct comparison between a phospholipid molecule and a triglyceride molecule. So they have given us a series of statements and they are saying that we have to choose the correct statement for the phospholipid molecule as well as the triglyceride molecule. So first of all, before moving on to this question, let's look at the lecture notes first and let's gain some basic knowledge about the structure of the phospholipids and the triglyceride, right? Alright, so if I talk about the phospholipid molecule, so phospholipid molecule is made up of the two fatty acid chain. This is one fatty acid chain and this is the other fatty acid chain, and these both fatty acid chains are hydrophobic in nature, right? And then the head of the phospholipid is basically made up of the glycerol and the phosphate, and it is hydrophilic in nature. If you see over here, so there is only one glycerol molecule, one phosphate molecule and two fatty acid chains, right? And if I talk about the triglycerides over here, so triglyceride is made up of the one glycerol molecule. The one glycerol molecule is having 3 OH group, one OH group with each carbon, and then there are 3 fatty acids, 1, 2 and 3. So what happens over here is that one H from the OH and the OH from the carboxylic acid group is eliminated, which eliminates a combination of 3 water molecules, and an ester bond is formed. How is the ester bond? C double bond O O. So there are 3 ester bonds which are formed in the triglyceride. If I talk about the phospholipid molecules, so in the phospholipid molecules there are 2 ester bonds which are formed, right? Because there is one glycerol and the 2 fatty acid chain. If there are 2 fatty acid chains, so there will be 2 ester bonds which will be formed. Like for example over here there were 3 fatty acid chains. There were 3 fatty acids, right? Or you can say the fatty acid chains. So there were 3 ester bonds were formed, right? But over here, as there are only 2 fatty acid chains, so only 2 ester bonds are formed over here in the phospholipid molecule, right? So now let's look at the options one by one and try to figure out the correct answer. Phospholipid molecules contain the hydrophobic phosphate group. I already told you guys that the phosphate comes in the head. The phosphate group comes in the head portion of the phospholipid molecule, and the head portion is the hydrophilic in nature. So option A is incorrect, contains one glycerol group. One glycerol molecule. Yes, it is correct that phospholipid contains one glycerol molecules. Then they say that triglycerides contain 3 glycerol molecules. No, triglyceride also contains one glycerol molecule just like the phospholipid. Then the phospholipid molecules contain fewer ester bonds and the triglyceride contains more ester bonds. Yes, I already told you guys that the phospholipid molecules have 2 ester bonds and the triglyceride molecules have 3 ester bonds. Phospholipid molecules have less fatty acids, right? Because phospholipid molecules have 2 fatty acids and the triglyceride molecules have 3 fatty acids. So this statement is also incorrect. Hence the correct statement over here is option C. Fewer ester bonds are in the phospholipid molecule and more ester bonds are there in the triglyceride molecules, right? So I hope that this MCQ is clear to all of you. Statement 1 says that it can be liquid or solid at room temperature. Yes, we know that the triglycerides can either be liquid or solid at room temperature, but it doesn't specifically gives a function to store the energy. Like this feature is not specifically related to the storage of energy. वैसे this option is correct. This statement is correct, but it is not complementary to the features which make triglycerides suitable to store the energy. It contains the higher proportion of the carbon-hydrogen bond. Yes, this is a suitable feature. Why? Because we know that the lipids have more energy than the carbohydrates. Why? Because it has a higher proportion of the carbon-hydrogen bonds as compared to the carbohydrates, right? Also, the fats are insoluble in water. Yes, we know that fats are insoluble in water. Now, how this feature insoluble in water is suitable for the energy storage? Because we know that the triglycerides are hydrophobic in nature, right? The triglycerides are hydrophobic hydrophobic in nature. Due to their hydrophobic nature, they cannot mix with the water molecules, so they are efficient for the energy storage as they won't mix with the other bodily fluids, right? So this is a suitable feature. Less dense than water. Yes, fat is less dense than water. Triglyceride is less dense than water, but it is not a suitable feature for the energy store, right? वैसे this option is correct, this statement is correct, but it is not a suitable feature for the energy storage. The only two suitable features for the energy storage are 2 and 3 options, right? Which means that 2 and 3 statements, which means that option D is our correct answer. Alright G, so now let's move on to question 4 over here. This question number 4 is from October-November 19, paper 1-1, question 11. The question says that some foods contain the hydrogenated vegetable oils. These are the unsaturated fats that have been converted to the saturated fats. Now basically what are the unsaturated fats? Unsaturated fats are those fats which are containing the carbon-carbon double bond, and the saturated fats have only the carbon-carbon single bond. They do not have the carbon-carbon double bonds, right? So they are basically saying that which property of the fats will have changed. So from the unsaturated fats, they have been converted to the saturated fats. So for it, let me refer you guys to a diagram in the lecture as well. कि यहाँ पे if you guys see, so this is a simple fatty acid chain, right? This is a straight fatty acid chain with no double bonds, right? This is a saturated fatty acid chain. Then this is a unsaturated fatty acid chain. Why? Because it is having the carbon-carbon double bond. And because of that carbon-carbon double bond, you guys can see that there is a kink in the tail, right? What is the kink? It is basically the bending of the tail in another direction, right? So you can see that there is a bending of the tail in another direction. So this is known as the kink. So because of the unsaturation of the fatty acids, there is a kink which has developed, right? So basically they are saying that which property of the fats will have changed. Their hydrocarbon chains will fit together more closely. So basically they are saying that as compared to the unsaturated fatty acids, the saturated fatty acids hydrocarbon chains will fit together more closely. In the saturated fatty acids, the hydrocarbon chains will fit together more closely. Let's see that is this statement correct or not. वैसे तो this is the correct answer, but let me explain it to you by a diagram. Yeah, this is the diagram. You guys can see that this is the unsaturated fatty acid, right? And you guys can see that the chain has having the kink in it. The hydrocarbon chain is having a kink in it, right? So basically these hydrocarbon chains are not close together, they are far apart. So in the unsaturated fatty acids, the chains are far apart, and in the saturated fatty acids, you guys can see that the chains are close together, right? They are closely packed together. Or you can say that the chains will fit together more closely. Hence, the correct answer to this MCQ will be option A. Let's discuss the other options as well, that why option B, C and D are incorrect. Their solubility in water increases. If I talk about the unsaturated fatty acids or the saturated fatty acids, both are poorly soluble in the water. Means that because they are hydrophobic and the water is hydrophilic, or you can say that the triglycerides or the fats are non-polar in nature and the water is polar in nature. That's why the fat is insoluble in the water, right? Then option C says that they will have more double bonds in their molecules. So basically in the question, unsaturated fatty acids are being converted into the saturated fatty acids, which means that the saturated fatty acid has only carbon-carbon single bond. They do not have the carbon-carbon double bond. So hence option C is also incorrect. They will remain liquid at room temperature. If I talk about the saturated fatty acids, so they are not liquid at room temperature. They are solid at room temperature, and they are known as the fats, right? This is, we are talking about the triglycerides which are saturated. I hope that this MCQ is clear to all of you. Now let's move on to question 5. Now question 5 over here is from October-November 19, paper 1-2, question 10. It says that the diagram shows the formation of the biological macromolecule, and we can clearly see that a triglyceride is being formed. Triglyceride triglyceride is being formed with the release of 3 water molecules. Which type of bonds are formed in the macromolecule produced? So basically they are saying that in the formation of triglyceride, which type of the bonds are formed. So I already told you guys in the above MCQs as well that which type of bond will be formed. This is known as the ester bond, C double bond OO, right? This is known as the ester bond, and it is made when the carboxylic acid group reacts with the alcohol group. The H from the alcohol group and OH from the carboxylic acid group is removed and condensation reaction takes place. This is known as the condensation reaction, basically where the water is being removed and the ester bond is being formed. This is the condensation reaction, and I believe they will ask the name of the reaction in the further MCQ. So you should keep this in mind that this is the condensation reaction. So which type of bond? They are asking that which type of the bond is formed. They are asking that which type of bond is formed in the macromolecule product, basically. So the correct answer over here is option A, the ester bond is formed, right? I hope that you are getting this MCQ, and I hope that I'm able to make this MCQ clear to all of you, right? So now let's move on to question number 6. Acha, now, yeah, this is the question basically where they have asked us about the condensation reaction. It is question number 6, which is from October-November 19, paper 1-3, question 8. It says that what is the maximum number of the condensation reactions that occur when a triglyceride is synthesized? So I already told you guys that the synthesis of triglyceride is done by the condensation reaction, and each condensation reaction releases one water molecule, right? For example, the formation of the ester bond is a condensation reaction, and how many ester bonds are formed over here? 3 ester bonds are formed, right? By the help of 3 alcohol group and the 3 carboxylic acid group. So in total there are the 3 condensation reactions that take place for the formation of the triglyceride, right? So hence the correct answer over here is option C, 3. Now let's have a look at question number 7, which is from May-June 19, paper 1-3, question 9. It says that what can occur as a result of the condensation reaction, and they have given us the 4 statements, and we have to tell that what basically occurs as a result of condensation reaction, which means that we have to select the statements which are correct regarding the condensation reaction. In the condensation reaction, a disaccharide is formed. Yes, this statement can be correct. Why? Because we know that 2 monosaccharides, when they combine together, they form a disaccharide, right? Disaccharide is formed and the glycosidic linkage is formed over here, like in the formation of the glycosidic linkage, right? Like in the formation of the triglyceride, what was happening, that one glycerol molecule and 3 fatty acid molecules were combined together to form the triglyceride. Similarly, 2 monosaccharides also combined together to form the disaccharide, which basically gives the glycosidic bond, which basically combines together. Basically these two, you can say that these 2 monosaccharides combine together to form the maltose, and it gives the glycosidic bond by the formation of the glycosidic bond. Like for example over here you can see that this is the glycosidic bond, this OC, this is the glycosidic bond, right? A glycosidic bond is formed. Yes, I already told you guys that a glycosidic bond is also formed in the condensation reaction. A molecule of water is produced. Yes, in the condensation reaction, if we talk about the condensation of the triglyceride, right? In the formation of the triglyceride also what was happening, that the water molecule was being formed, right? So yes, the water molecule is obviously formed during the condensation reaction. Alright, sorry guys, basically in statement 2 they are saying a glycosidic bond is broken. So it is not broken, basically it is formed, right? A glycosidic bond is not broken, it is formed. Sorry, I misread the question. I misread the statement. Statement 4 is saying that 2 monosaccharides join together in the condensation reaction. Yes, I already told you guys that 2 monosaccharides join together to form a disaccharide. Hence, the correct answer for this MCQ must be option C, 1, 3 and 4. These 4 statements are correct regarding the condensation reaction. Question number 8 over here is from May June 19 paper 1 3 question 11. It says that which row describes a triglyceride. Basically, if you look at the structure of the triglyceride, it's simply the hydrocarbon chain, right? CH, and this R, basically R represents the hydrocarbon chain. So it only consists of a hydrocarbon chain, right? And an ester bond. Now the ester bond does not have a that much effect on the polarity of the you can say the fats or the triglyceride. It does not have that much effect on the polarity of the triglyceride. So we can say that the triglycerides are basically hydrophobic, or you can say that they are non-polar in nature, right? So hydrophilic means water loving, but they are not water loving, they are non-polar, right? They are non-polar and they are hydrophobic. Now you have to remember these points to solve the further MCQs as well, because it will come again and again. I already told you guys that the triglycerides are non-polar. If I talk about the alcohol, so alcohol can be polar or non-polar depending upon its size, right? For example, if it is having a small hydrocarbon chain, so the triglyceride may or may not, or you can say that it can slightly be soluble in the alcohol, right? And but if I talk about the long hydrocarbon chains, right, so if we talk about the long hydrocarbon chains, so the non-polar effect or the non-polar part of the alcohol increases, and the polar part of the alcohol as compared to the non-polar part shortens, or you can say that the non-polar part increases so much that it marks the effect of the polar part of the alcohol. So the alcohol is treated as the non-polar, right? So if there is a long chain alcohol, it definitely means that the non-polar part is more dominating, and we know that triglycerides are also non-polar, right? So non-polar and non-polar will dissolve themselves, because we know that like dissolve like. The non-polar will dissolve in the non-polar. So you can say that yes, the triglycerides are soluble in alcohol, right? Triglycerides are soluble in alcohol, right? For the A levels, you have to remember this, that the triglycerides are basically soluble in the alcohol. And if you have to be more specific, so the higher alcohols, like for example butanol, pentanol, like this, right? The long chain alcohols. So the which row describes the triglycerides? Hydrophilic? No, it is not hydrophilic, it is hydrophobic, which means that it is non-polar. Insoluble in the alcohol? No, the triglycerides are not insoluble in the alcohol. Majority of the times the triglycerides can be soluble in the alcohol. Why? Because we know that the long chain alcohols, like for example from the butanol, right, the long chain alcohols have more of the hydrocarbon chain, which means that there is a more of a non-polar effect, and triglycerides are also non-polar. So non-polar and non-polar, so which means that they both can dissolve in each other. So hence option D over here is the correct answer. I hope that I am able to make this MCQ clear to all of you. I have tried my best possible to clear this MCQ to you guys and make you guys understand the concept. Alright, so now let's move on to question 9 over here. Question 9 over here is from February March 2019 paper 1 to question 12. It says that which statements about the differences between the phospholipids and the triglycerides are correct. Now the statement 1 says that phospholipids have the hydrophobic regions but triglycerides do not. I already told you guys that the triglycerides are basically non-polar in nature, right? And non-polar are also referred to as hydrophobic. Obviously triglycerides cannot be hydrophilic in nature, right? So this statement is incorrect, that the phospholipids have a hydrophobic region but triglycerides do not. Triglycerides do have the hydrophobic regions, right? Then statement 2 over here says that the fatty acids in the phospholipids are always saturated, but in the triglycerides they may be saturated or unsaturated. No, the fatty acids either in the phospholipid, either in the triglyceride, they can be saturated or unsaturated, right? If you remember that I showed you the diagram of the phospholipid over here, you guys can see that the fatty acid is unsaturated. So it is not a rule, right? Fatty acids can be saturated and it can be unsaturated as well. Then statement 3 over here says that the phospholipids are the polar molecules but triglycerides are non-polar molecules. Yes, this statement is correct that phospholipids are considered to be the polar molecules despite of the non-polar fatty acid tails, right? But they are considered to be the polar molecules because of the charged phosphate group, right? Because of this they are considered to be the polar molecules and the triglycerides are considered to be the non-polar molecules. So hence the correct answer for this MCQ is option D. Statement 3 is only correct, difference between the phospholipids and triglycerides. Moving on to question 10, which is from May-June 19, paper 1-3, question 12. The question says that the diagram shows three triglycerides X, Y and Z. This is X, this is Y and this is Z respectively. It says that what is the correct for these triglycerides: contain the saturated fatty acids, contains the unsaturated fatty acids, contains more than two different fatty acids, right? So let's look at the X, Y and Z images one by one and try to figure out the uh, triglycerides which contains the saturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids are those fatty acids which contain the carbon-carbon single bond, right? So the saturated fatty acid over here would be Z. Yes, Z is a saturated fatty acid. Similarly, Y will also be a saturated fatty acid. Why? Because in Y also you guys can see that this chain over here, this fatty acid chain basically over here is saturated, right? And if I similarly talk about the structure X over here, so in the structure X over here you guys can see that this fatty acid chain is basically saturated. These are, if I talk about more about this structure, so this is the triglyceride structure which is basically made up of the alcohol group, right? This is the alcohol group and then over here this is the fatty acid chain group, right? And they have combined together to form the ester bond. Now, so contains the saturated fatty acid. All X, Y and Z contain the saturated fatty acids. Now, if I talk about the other statement which says that contains the unsaturated fatty acids. Now, the unsaturated fatty acids are the one with the carbon-carbon double bond, right? This is the unsaturated fatty acid. This is the unsaturated fatty acid. This is also unsaturated fatty acid. So only X and Y contain the unsaturated fatty acid. We can see no double bonds over here in the structure Z. So only X and Y contain the unsaturated fatty acids, right? Then what does the other option says, or you can say what does the other statement says? The other statement says contains more than two different fatty acids, right? Two different fatty acids. So yes, if I look at structure X over here, so structure X contain more than two different fatty acids. How? Because you guys can see that this fatty acid is different from this fatty acids compared to the number of carbons as well. Why? Because how you guys can know the number of carbons? Because you know that this pointed represents the carbon and this is going beyond the first fatty acid chain, right, in the structure X, and it contains one double bond and the other fatty acid chain contains three double bond. So X contains three different fatty acid chains. So yes, X can be one of the correct answers. If I look at Z over here, so Z, you know that these two fatty acid chains are same and this fatty acid chain is different, so it contains only two different fatty acid chains, but the option says that contains more than two different fatty acid chains, right? So X will not be included, Z will not be included in our answer. If I talk about Y over here, so Y also contains more than two type of the different fatty acid chain. Like for example, this is the simply saturated fatty acid chain, this is the unsaturated fatty acid chain with one double bond, right? And this is the unsaturated fatty acid chain with two double bond. So it also contains the three different fatty acid chains. So Y can also be the correct answer for this. So hence the correct answer over here would be option A, right? I hope that this is clear to all of you. Now let's have a look at question 11 over here, which is from May June 18 paper 1 question 8. It says that phospholipids and triglycerides are important biological molecules. Which properties are correct for these molecules? Non-polar and partially hydrophobic. So if I talk about the non-polar molecules, so I already told you guys that triglycerides are the non-polar molecules. And if I talk about the phospholipid molecules, so the phospholipid molecule has a head and the two fatty acid tails. So the head of the phospholipid is basically hydrophilic in nature, which means that water loving, and the tails basically are the hydrophobic in nature. So we can say that the phospholipid molecule is partially hydrophobic, right? So phospholipid molecule is partially hydrophobic and the non-polar molecule is the triglyceride. So hence option C is our correct answer over here. Now let's move on to question 12 over here. Now the question 12 over here is from October-November 17 paper 1-3 question 11. The question says that the diagrams show 4 fatty acids. These are the 4 fatty acids which they are talking about in the question. It says that each with a chain of 18 carbon atoms. Which fatty acid as a part of the phospholipid molecule would contribute most to the fluidity of the cell surface membrane? So basically, if the kinks are there in the, if more kinks are there, like for example these are the kinks which are produced due to the double bond. The more kinks due to the unsaturated fatty acid basically increases the fluidity of the cell membrane. How it increases the fluidity of the cell surface membrane? Basically it prevents the phospholipid molecules from packing tightly together, right? If it would be the saturated fatty acid, if there would be no kinks, so the phospholipid molecules would pack tightly together, right? But due to the kinks, what happens is that there is, you can see that more space between the two fatty acid chain, right? So the kinks increases the fluidity by creating more space between the molecules. So more the kinks, which it means that more the fluidity. So in the question they say that would contribute most to the fluidity of the cell membrane. It means that we have to select the structure with most of the carbon-carbon double bond, right? So the more carbon-carbon double bond are seen, or you can say the highest number of carbon-carbon double bond are seen in option D. So hence option D is our correct answer over here. Alright, so now let's move on to question 13 over here. Question 13 is from May June 17 paper 1 question 10. It says that the structure of the phospholipids and the triglycerides include the following. Number 1, glycerol linked to the fatty acid. Number 2, hydrophobic fatty acid chain. Number 3, saturated fatty acid chains. Now they say that which structures enable the formation of a lipid bilayer in the cell surface membrane. So basically this is how a lipid bilayer is formed, by the combination of two phospholipid molecules, right? The phospholipid molecules, the two hydrophobic fatty acid chains basically face towards each other. So they are saying that which of these structures enable the formation of the lipid bilayer. So the glycerol linked to the fatty acid basically makes the ester bond. It is not involved in the formation of the lipid bilayer, right? Then if I talk about the saturated fatty acid chain, so whether be it a saturated fatty acid chain or be it an unsaturated fatty acid chain, the lipid bilayer can be formed, right? So it is not necessary to be a saturated fatty acid chain. Then hydrophobic fatty acid chain. Yes, the two hydrophobic fatty acid chains will face towards each other, right? And the lipid bilayer will be formed. So hence the correct answer for this MCQ is option D, which is 2 only. I hope that this MCQ is clear to all of you. Why basically it is the hydrophobic fatty acid chain? Because you know that on the external part of the cell, right, and on the internal part of the cell as well, inside the cell as well, there is the liquid medium, or you can say a water based medium over there, right? So it is necessary that the hydrophilic part is facing the water medium or the liquid medium of the you can say the water medium of the cell, right? So hence the correct answer over here is option D, 2 only. Then let's move on to the last topical MCQ of the lipid from the biological molecules, which is question 14. This question is from October-November 15, paper 1 to question 9. It says that which row describes a triglyceride. I already told you guys that the triglycerides are non-polar, or you can say hydrophobic in nature. They are not hydrophilic, and yes, they are soluble in the alcohol. So hence the correct answer over here would be option C. We have already discussed a question like question 14 in the above MCQs. Yes, like question number 8, we have discussed it in very much detail, so you can refer to this question for the detailed explanation, right? So basically now we are done with the topical MCQs of the lipids chapter of the biological molecules. In the next class we will be discussing the topical MCQs of the proteins, right? And I think this class will be divided into 2 parts, and then we are going to solve the water one as well, right? सो अब हमारे पास जो है वो प्रोटीन के MCQs रह गए टॉपिकल फ्रॉम द बायोलॉजिकल मॉलिक्यूल चैप्टर, और हमारे पास जो है वो वाटर के MCQs रह गए फ्रॉम द बायोलॉजिकल मॉलिक्यूल चैप्टर. सो इन द अपकमिंग वीडियोज आई विल बी सॉल्विंग दीज टॉपिकल MCQs as well. Alright everyone, so that was it for today's class where we solved the topical MCQs of lipids. I hope that you guys really found this class helpful, and if you guys did, do consider subscribing this channel, and do tell me in the comments that how do you find these lectures. Do remember me in your prayers. Allah Hafiz everyone.